Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's another great day at Belmont. The sun's shining, the green roofs are blooming. Just above your head here, it's beautiful. The bees are working. But we're so glad you're here today. And today is going to be a great opportunity for our faculty, staff, and a few of our students to learn a little more about what's going on in the education business today. As we talk about a topic that's so critical to our state and to our nation, we're honored to have really the guy here today from our Congress to lead that discussion. This topic of education is one both our moderator and our special guest today have had a lot to say about over time. Our moderator this morning is Dr. Jesse Register. He's a former director of Metro Public Schools for Nashville and now a distinguished professor at Belmont University. He's leading our efforts in the new Center for the Improvement of Educational Systems. And just last week, we signed a couple of contracts with 2 school districts in Tennessee to begin our work, which I think is so necessary and fits right in, Senator, with your beliefs about who ought to be running the schools. Today, Dr. Register will be interviewing the esteemed Lamar Alexander, Senator Alexander. Senator Alexander has a long history of education, of a commitment to education. He served previously as a U.S. Department of Education Secretary and as president of the University of Tennessee, and actually did a 1-year stint here on campus at Belmont. After you left, which role? UT?
After I was governor.
After you were governor, and wrote a, thanks for, I always need help with these introductions. I mean, what's the point of a script?
I needed a job. So
what's the point of a script when you can't see it unless you do that? Last year he was elected to serve as the chairman of the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, and he noted his top priorities, including the reform, or really just setting aside, of No Child Left Behind. And he's kept that promise, and he's kept that priority in front of him with new legislation. The Every Student Succeeds Act is the name of the act. It ended the federal mandates on Common Core and testing, and it allows the states now to control the allocation of federal funds, which is kind of pretty much back to the future, I think, in the way we're managing our education. Senator Alexander, you come to a place that's committed to supporting public education, especially K through 12. We believe in our potential of that system to make America great, to keep America great. That was a Jeffersonian doctrine, I guess, from the beginning. And our commitment is to build a strong teacher education program here at Belmont and to help out in the all across Tennessee with superintendents and maybe even around the country, right, Jesse? We always start waving our arms to help leaders understand what it takes to move our education systems forward. And a program I'm so proud of, too, in a very small way, our Bridges to Belmont program this year will bring, is it 35 students from Maplewood? 40, that's what I thought. We keep upping it. 34, okay, well, it'll be 40 next year. Since I said that, we got to pay. But we started with 25 and went to 30, then 35. The students from Stratford, from Maplewood, from Whites Creek, and Hunters Lane, these students who wouldn't have much of an opportunity, and I see Chris Henson back there smiling and nodding, who's running, I don't know how we would say it. He took over when Jesse left and keeps on keeping the fuels burning at the Metro Public Schools. But that's a program we're so proud of for the hope that it brings to those kids and the opportunities. And we're very proud of the way those first 3 classes have performed, and we'll be bringing in our 4th cohort full scholarships to kids that wouldn't otherwise be able to go to a place like Belmont. So we're excited about that. With all that said, let me turn this interview over to Dr. Jesse Register. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fisher. Let's give Dr. Fisher a hand. I'm here. I'm at Belmont, and I love it. I've been here about 6 or 7 months now, and I'm here for one reason: because of the vision of Dr. Bob Fisher. And so I really want to recognize that, and the Bridges program is just one example of great things happening. I will say this, a personal note, that when he asked me to come, he didn't say a good education department. He said world class. And so what we're building here at Belmont is a world class education program. We're very proud of the work we're doing, the faculty that's here. Senator Alexander is certainly no stranger to folks from Tennessee. Has a long, outstanding career in education and public service here in Tennessee and in the United States. Senator, thank you so much for giving us a little of your time this morning. This is an invited group. It's a group of K-12 educators and leaders, higher ed leaders, some elected officials. I see school board members in the audience. And charter school leaders and other people here to listen to you talk about something that's very important. We also have, I think, a few students in our midst, some undergraduate and graduate students, and from a couple of different departments. So we're glad to have all of you here. We can't do introductions because I'd have to stop and introduce everyone in the room. By any definition, the Every Student Succeeds Act is landmark legislation. Let's be really clear about that. It will have a tremendous impact on public education in the United States for the next decade at least, and beyond that. Senator Alexander deserves so much of the credit for leading this reauthorization of ESSA at a time when we all know in this room bipartisan support on most issues has been very difficult to reach. And I think we ought to stop and just recognize the fact that on our stage this morning is the person who, more than anyone else, I think pushed this through at a very opportune time. So, Senator Alexander, thank you so much for your national leadership in doing this work. We have a few questions that we're going to address. I think we'll cover hopefully the big picture of ESSA and where we are with that, and we'll save a little bit of time at the end for a couple of questions from the floor. The Senator is on a very tight time schedule. He has a flight out very shortly after the meeting, so we'll try to very much stay on time and end about 10:45 and then have some questions from the audience. Senator, it was remarkable that you were able to spearhead this work. Let's talk about this as an introduction to the work, the reauthorization at a time when bipartisan support has been very limited. So the question is, how are you able to pull it off?
Well, thanks, Jesse. I'll answer your question, but let me say a couple of preliminary things. Let me thank you for being a terrific leader in education, both in Chattanooga and in Nashville for a number of years. Let me say, as I said to the leadership group from Belmont, Belmont's had the extraordinary advantage of having two really terrific leaders over the last 40 years or so, in Bill Trout and then Bob Fisher, and I've known them both. They're two of the best leaders in higher education, and you can see the results all around as Belmont has occupied such a prominent role here. One of my colleagues, John Thune's daughter, went here, graduated here, was a good athlete here, and so you have a lot of South Dakota support at Belmont University as well. But it's very satisfying to be here, and I want to congratulate you for that. I brought with me Peter and Lindsay at the back. If you'll raise your hands, they're the staff people who wrote the law fixing No Child Left Behind. And so if you have questions about it that I can't answer, they can. And if there are any mistakes in it, they made them. So, But they did an absolutely terrific job. Bob Moran is here also. He's to the right. He's working on the Higher Education Act. So my job is to represent you, and we get good advice from you as we do this. Now, the question was, how did this happen? And at a time when bipartisanship is difficult. Well, the short answer is I was paired with a senior Democrat on the committee, Patty Murray of Washington, who also likes to get results. The reason bipartisanship is difficult is because there are a lot of forces out there who take the my way or the highway rule. If they were standing in Nashville hitchhiking to New York City, and they'd been standing there for 7 years, which is how long No Child Left Behind was overdue. If they'd been standing there for 7 years and somebody offered them a ride to Philadelphia, they wouldn't take it. They'd stay there another 7 years until somebody came along with a ride to New York. I'll take the ride to Philadelphia and then get to New York from not far away. And that's the first thing. I mean, if you're in a marriage or in a university or in business, as Ronald Reagan used to say, if you can get 70 or 80% of what you want, you take it, and then you live to fight another day to talk about the other. So I worked with Senator Murray on what we could agree on. Number two, it's difficult because of the subject, and you all know that. I mean, I said there are crocodiles lurking at every part of the pond, and it's like being at the University of Tennessee football game where you got 100,000 people in the stands, and every single one of them knows which play to call, and they usually call it. Education's the same way. And if you're a school board member, or a teacher, or professor, Jesse certainly knows that, you get advice from a lot of people who are sure they know more than anybody else about what to do. So there's a lot of that going on. So that's the hard that's the hard part, is the forces that say no compromise, or it's a difficult subject. But the easier part, the part that made it work, was Senator Murray, and then just focusing on the subject pretty hard and taking the advantage. Let's look for the things that we agree on. The one unique thing that made it possible, though, was that almost everybody had become fed up with Washington telling schools and classroom teachers, school boards and governors so much about what to do about their children. The Elementary Secondary Education Act provides about 4% of the money for elementary and secondary education in the country. 4%. Now, there's a little more federal money than that, 4 or 5% more for disability and other things. That's another set of rules. But the rules under Elementary Secondary Act, 4% of the money. And for that, you got told what your standards should be, what your tests should be, whether your school was failing, whether the teacher was any good or not, how to fix a performing school. And there's no way in the world that anyone in a small department in Washington has the capacity to do that in 100,000 public schools with 3.5 million teachers and 50 million children. No one is that wise. So people were so fed up with it that the National Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers had exactly the same view as the Governors Association and the Chief State School Officers. That's pretty unusual. And that coalition produced a consensus, and that consensus was keep the requirement for the 17 tests, state-designed tests, tests that each take about, on average, 2 hours each. That's 1.5 tests a year on average. Keep that requirement. Keep the requirement for reporting the results so everybody can know what's happening. But move the responsibility for what to do about the results back to the classroom teacher, back to the local school board, and back to the states. That's what happened. So we had a consensus that it was a law everybody wanted fixed, and we had a consensus on how to fix it.
I've got to say that when I first heard that your name mentioned with spearheading a reauthorization, it made me catch my breath. I thought, wow, how can he take that on at this time? And that was some time ago now.
Well, I had dinner with one Democratic senator right afterwards, and he said, I wouldn't have given you 5-to-1 odds that you could have gotten that done this year. And I told Arnie Duncan, the Secretary of Education, about that conversation the next day. He said, I thought it was 10-to-1.
That's what I was going to say. Senator, why is it so important at this time? I think you've already partially answered that, but let's just zero in on what's happening right now and why this is such an important legislative move at this point in time.
Well, one, No Child Left Behind should have been authorized 7 years ago, and as a result, it wasn't working. If it were applied to all the schools, almost every one of our 100,000 public schools would be labeled a failure. So the department issued these waivers, and instead of just saying, okay, you've got a waiver, they said, I'll give you a waiver, but only if you do A, B, C, D, and E. Only if you do evaluate teachers this way, only if you fix schools this way, only if you have these standards. And so the department was in effect acting as a national school board for schools in 42 states with waivers, 80,000 schools. So the first reason it's important is because it was unworkable. The second reason is that the states had done a lot of work in the last 20 years. I mean, the states were moving right along toward adopting high academic standards by working with each other, not being told what to do by Washington. The states had done a lot of work on new assessments, on testing, to see whether students were reaching those standards. But Washington hadn't told them to do it. The states had done a lot of work on a so-called accountability system. What do you do about the results of the tests? How does that apply to teachers? The states had done a lot of work on teacher evaluation. You know, Tennessee led the way on that, and paying teachers more for teaching well with our master teacher program and evaluating teachers. That's not easy to do. And the states were doing fine, until the federal government, I think, stuck its nose too far into it and created a huge backlash on Common Core, a huge backlash on teacher evaluation, and really set both those efforts back. So it was important to get the ball back in the hands of the people who really should have it and say, okay, the path to better teaching is through the states. The path to higher academic standards is up to the governor, the legislature, and the school boards. The path to figuring out the right kind of tests and how many tests really is best left in the hands of the classroom teacher, the school board, and the state officials. So that was the need to do it, and there's no need for me to say in this group the importance of education in our society today. For all those reasons, it was very important.
One other Washington question, and then I'll bring up a couple of points about the state work in Tennessee. So how are things going in Washington now in terms of ESSA? What are the current challenges, and how are you facing those?
Well, I want to say two things about that. The U.S. Department of Education has got some people in it that just can't take their hands off the local schools. And so that right out of the box, on the first regulation that they're supposed to write, they basically put out a proposed regulation that is against the new law, and they use a method to do it that's prohibited by the new law. I mean, we know what they do over there, so we not only didn't authorize some things, we actually wrote into the law prohibitions and said the secretary may not do X, Y, Z, and D, and despite that, they're trying to do it. So we're having 6 hearings on that in the Senate. We had one the other day with the new secretary, and I reminded him of these things. A national coalition is formed of governors, NEA, AFT, chief state school officers, and they're paying attention to this. And I've urged all the governors to do the same thing in the states. I'd like to see Tennessee, I'd like to see the governor and Candace and the TEA and the chief state, all the people involved in education, PTA, form a coalition and say to the department, we're supposed to have the responsibility, and we're going to insist that the law be implemented the way Congress wrote it, because apparently those in the Department of Education don't want to do it. So I'm going to do all I can to support that direction, your direction, but it will help, and that means this. We'll overturn the rule in the Senate if they write it the wrong way, although the president could veto it. We could use the appropriations process to slow them down. We can use the spotlight to slow them down. But states and teachers' organizations and others should resist a rule that doesn't follow the law. I wouldn't do it. And then if I were governor, I'd go to court and say, the law doesn't permit that. And we want the responsibility back in the states, which is what the law said. This law didn't pass by 5-4. We had 85 senators of both parties out of 100 vote for this law, and the president signed it. There's another thing about the bipartisanship. That, you know, you hear a lot about, let me use an example. When I was education secretary 20 years ago or so, I went to the opening of Camden Yards, which is the Orioles baseball stadium. Magnificent place to watch a baseball game. And I took our young son. And there's this massive screen up there on which the game is shown. And I remember being startled because so many people in that full house at the Orioles Stadium were watching the game on the screen instead of watching the game in front of them. And it kind of reminded me that how much then, and even today, the reality show has become the reality. You see that in the presidential race, which I won't get into. But it also happens in terms of what's happening in the Senate. The fact is, we get a lot done in the United States Senate, and we get a lot done in a bipartisan way. It's probably been the most productive Senate in 20 years. I mean, just this week, last week, we passed a comprehensive energy bill, a sportsman's bill. We're going to pass an energy and water appropriations bill this week. We fixed No Child Left Behind. We ended, if you know anything about medicine, what's called the doc fix, where we bumped along 17 times, creating consternation in doctors' offices about how we pay doctors. We've changed the way we pay doctors to quality instead of fee for service, which will happen over time. We passed a counterterrorism bill. I could give you such a long list, it would bore you to death. But no one knows that because the reality has become what people say about what we're doing instead of what we're doing. And the last, and I'll shut up on this, is we have presidential candidates running around against Common Core. The federal Common Core mandate is dead and gone. I mean, on last December, there's a law that says that the federal government is not authorized to set the state academic standards of Tennessee or any state, including specifically Common Core, and then there's a prohibition in there to keep the secretary from doing that. But still we have people running around running against it, even though it's not there, unless the governor and the legislature and the school board and the teachers want it to be there. So it's totally in the hands of the state, and Washington has zero to do with it. So the important thing is to realize that you have an enormous amount of flexibility now and opportunity over the next several months to take this freedom that you rightly should have anyway and begin to design your own classrooms, your own schools, your own standards, your own tests without excessive interference by the federal government for the small amount of money you get from Washington.
It's a tremendous challenge for states. And my question, we have a room full of educational leaders here and elected officials. What do we need to do in Tennessee to take full advantage of the law? What should the superintendents in the room and school board members and others around the state be doing at this point in time? I know the regulations still have to be written, and I assume that there's a lot of flexibility coming to the state. How do we get ready for it?
Well, I'm going to be very specific about that. Let's start with the academic year 27-18 and work backwards. The state has to, in order to get its share of the Title I dollars, Title I and II dollars, the state has to submit a plan. Basically, the plan's been up there for a while. And you don't have to keep submitting new plans to get the money every year. But the first thing the state should do is write a new plan. Now, it may want to do some of the same thing it's already doing, but the waivers under which schools are operating in 42 states, the waivers all expire in August. So the waiver, if the waiver said that you only have 7 ways to fix a turnaround school, that's gone by August. If the waiver says you only have you must evaluate teachers these 5 ways, that's gone by August. If the waiver says you have to adopt X standards and Y tests, that's gone by August. So if I were doing it, I would start now, not waiting for the regulations, and I'd begin to draft and write the kind of plan that I would submit to the U.S. Department of Education so that I could submit it by the end of the year, get it approved early in 2017, and begin to use it in 2017, 2018. Now, the department would say, well, don't go too fast, let us write the regulations. I wouldn't take that advice. I'd go ahead and draft them and adjust them according to the regulations. And if the regulations aren't consistent with the law, I wouldn't follow the regulations. I wouldn't follow the regulations. So I'd get to work figuring out, what would make a great school in Metro? What would make a great school district? Come up with your own ideas about how to do that. And then fit it into the federal template. Don't just start out with what you've already got. Or don't start out reading the rules and saying, okay, let's design a school system based on the rules. Forget the rules, write your own plan, then fit it into whatever the system is.
I think very important message for those of us in the state to be aggressive and to plan ahead.
And get advice from, you've got 2 contracts that sound like to help school districts do that. Yeah. That's pretty exciting stuff to me. If I were a superintendent or a school board member or a classroom teacher, I'd say this is terrific. Let's see what I'd really like to do, and then assume you can probably do it.
Our 2 superintendents in our first 2 districts are here this morning. Bobby Cox, Warren County, Chris Marzak, Murray County. Y'all stand up. These are the prototypes for our center here. Yeah, good. Thanks. So do you think some states might just settle for the status quo and settle to not change some of the regulations that they were actually pushed into under No Child under the waivers and the No Child Left Behind?
Yes, I do. But one reason is, now take Tennessee. I advised Governor Haslam when they started granting this waivers, just go ahead and get one, because most of what he was just coming in, and he had a majority in the legislature that would do then what he wanted them to do, and so my advice to him was just go ahead and get a waiver, because what the waiver was asking Tennessee to do, Tennessee was mostly already doing. So Tennessee had decided on its own to do most of what the waivers did. So you wouldn't want to change the things that you had decided on your own to do anyway. But you might want to review those things and see if what you decided to do 7 or 8 years ago, in light of your experience, is the right thing to do. And then I suppose there are some states who just won't have the get up and go to do it. They'll just take the easy way. But I'd start over. I'd start over. The thing about this is that if you submit a Title I plan and it's approved, you don't have to change it every year after that unless you change what you're doing. So the Title I plan is likely to last a while. I don't think our law will change much over the next 15 or 20 years. It's too hard to change. So if you write a plan that's approved, you'll have some stability in terms of educational policy from Washington. That'll be very refreshing. You won't have to keep guessing every year what somebody in Washington is telling you to do or not to do.
Mm-hmm. Good. Let's come back to the topic of accountability. I know you're a proponent of accountability, strong accountability. With greater accountability that's coming now, I think there will be a lot of states that are very challenged to make it a good system. We're experiencing difficulties in implementation now and this year in Tennessee with the 10 ready tests and the standardized testing that we're doing. If you would just share your thoughts a little bit on the opportunity and the challenges that we face as each of the states enter into looking at reforming or revising the accountability measures that we have.
Well, number one, a period of stability should help a lot. My guess is, now I don't know this, but my guess is that your problem with the 10 ready tests is that you had the backlash to Common Core. So you had to change Common Core and then you had to change the assessment. Well, you just can't do that overnight. And it costs a lot of money. And so And a lot of that was because a lot of people felt like Washington was telling Tennessee what its standards and tests ought to be. If the governor and the state legislature adopt what they are, you ought to be able to, so you ought to be able to get some stability, so the tests and the standards, once you get through this year and next year, ought to be pretty consistent. The rest of accountability is up to you. The hard part of the course is high standards, and that's one. And I actually had superintendents tell me, go ahead and tell us to do it from Washington, because otherwise we won't be able to get it done. I thought that was sort of a chicken way to look at it, to tell you the truth. I mean, it is hard to do, because you get parents and others come to you and say, I didn't have to learn that. Why does my kid have to learn that? Well, you got to buy into those standards. You got to say, if they want a job at Beretta or Nissan, they're going to have to know algebra and statistics and a few other things, or otherwise they're not going to have that kind of job. And if they were your age when they were trying to get a job, they could have got it without that. So you're going to have to fight that out locally. And the governor and the legislature and the school board is just going to have to be tough about it. And I know that's hard to do, but once it's resolved locally, then I think you've got it. You've got it for a while. And with the governor doing such a good job of raising Tennessee sites and causing all these companies to come here, and all the companies say the main thing they want is a better trained workforce. I mean, relating better schools to better jobs isn't that hard. And it's better done here than having somebody from a distance tell you to do it.
Is there some accountability or built into the new law for holding states accountable for their accountability systems?
Yes, there is some, but and there'll be an argument. I mean, we've passed the law and it's written in the law, and then different senators read it different ways, you know, now that it's passed. And the department reads it one way. So there'll still be some arguments about that. But the accountability that's built into the new system is mainly that in developing your new accountability system, which is in plain English, what do you do about the results of the tests? You have to consider some things. But how you consider them and what you do with the results is your business. So there is some federal requirement so you'll have to write your accountability system carefully enough to consider these various indicators, but the weight you give those indicators is up to you, and what you do with the results is up to you. And don't let somebody from Washington tell you differently, because that's what the law says. And if you need any help in doing that from those who wrote the law, I would offer, Jesse, that and to any of you here, that if you'd like for Peter and Lindsay to come down here and have a little seminar, and you say, all right, section 3BA says X, what is that supposed to mean? We can tell you what the people who passed the law think it's supposed to mean, and they'll be happy to do that, happy to do that. In fact, I'd welcome the opportunity to do that.
So the accountability conversation is one that's very important to people around here. I think what I'll commend you for is keeping in the legislation the accountability that looks at achievement gaps. And I don't know if you have a comment about that, about what you kept in the law that addresses the achievement of different subgroups in the population.
You know, I'm going to ask Lindsay or Peter to answer that question, because I see people writing things down and I want to be exactly accurate. So what would be your comment? Just speak up loudly enough about achievement gaps and what they should be thinking about.
Well, I mean, one of the most important parts of No Child Left Behind that significant bipartisan agreement on keeping was the annual reporting on student academic performance. It's aggregated by subgroup.
Speak up, Peter.
Students with disability.
It was on.
It's on.
Students with disabilities. One of the issues in returning more decisions back to states and local communities was, you know, how are we going to maintain some level of federal, national, public accountability for what states are doing? And one of the main negotiating points was the more power we return to states and local communities, the more transparency we would provide in what they're doing. And one of those issues was, you know, from the concern of civil rights groups, business community, disability groups was to increase the transparency on how groups like homeless children are doing in schools, which a lot of people haven't had a lot of awareness about. Foster children in schools.
Okay, that's in the law, but as they're writing their own accountability system here, what does that mean they have to do about it?
Well, we didn't increase requirements on what they need to do about those students. What we did was increase transparency rather than putting new mandates.
What I'm trying to get you to say is they have to consider it.
Correct. They need to be looking at that information.
But it doesn't tell them what to do about it.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They need to be looking at how all this.
If in your accountability system, it says look at the needs of homeless children, that's new, or that part, you do have to look at that, but it doesn't say what you have to do about that. Is that correct? Is that correct? That's your decision what to do about it. The big fault that we've had up to this time is the U.S. Department of Education was telling you, you have to look at, let's say, homeless children as an example, although that wasn't true then. And then once you find that, here's what you have to do about it. Or you have to take the standardized test and use it to evaluate teachers, and once you get a score, here's what you have to do about it. Or you have to use a standardized test and look at a school in Metro, and once you find out what the score for that school is, you can only change it these 7 ways. That's all gone. So there are more things that you have to look at in your accountability system, but what you do about those things is supposed to be up to you. Did I say that accurately?
Absolutely.
And I think that also applies to the bottom 5%, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the 2 places where there needs to be particular focus by states and school districts are schools that are in the bottom 5%. Now, what is the bottom 5%? That's up to the state to determine, but they have to have a bottom 5% and do the school districts.
Defining the bottom 5% is up to the state.
Yes.
What to do about the bottom 5% is up to the state.
Up to the school districts, yes.
Up to the school district.
Yes.
So the state defines the bottom 5%, and the Metro School District in Maury County just decides what to do about the bottom 5%.
Yes. And then the school districts are also supposed to look at schools where any one of the subgroups of students, whether it's African American students, Hispanic students, students with disability, where they're consistently underperforming based on the state-designed accountability system. School districts need to do something there as well, and schools.
But do something. I started out in this at the beginning last year. I proposed getting rid of the 17 standardized tests because I heard so much about over-testing from everybody. And the more I listened, though, the more I came to a conclusion, and several of us did, that it wasn't those tests. As I said earlier, I mean, those are math, English, and science between the 3rd and the 12th grade. They each take about 2 hours, according to testimony we had. So that's like a test and a half a year. That shouldn't be a burden in a school. The problem was the accountability system in Washington that told you what to do about the tests. And that was causing everybody to use those tests for everything. I mean, if you want to know whether a teacher deserved to be a good teacher, you just looked at that test. If you want to know whether a school was succeeding, you looked at that test. So schools were giving dozens of tests to prepare for that test. And we found in Florida, in one school district, there were 183 tests given, but only 17 of them were required by the federal government. They were state and local tests, and many of them were the result of preparing for the accountability system. So as you write your accountability system, I think probably the main thing to think about is you have these tests. They're your tests. They're not federal tests. They're required by the federal government, but you design them, and they're to standards that you pick. And you get a result, but if you want to use those to decide how to evaluate teachers, that's up to you. If you want to use those to rate your schools A to F, that's your business. That's the big difference between the way things were and the way things should be.
Senator, I have one more question. I want to give you an opportunity to say anything else you'd like to say or summarize what the significant aspects of ESSA and the reauthorization. I may have missed something, but if you could take a moment and just talk about big picture, what do you see in summary, and then we do have about 5 minutes that we can open up for a question or two from the floor.
Well, the biggest picture is that it reverses the trend toward a national school board and puts the responsibility for schools back in the hands of the adults closest to them, the classroom teachers, the school board members, the legislature, and the governor. The Wall Street Journal editorial said it was the largest devolution of power from Washington to the states in 25 years. I believe that because I've been around long enough to watch it. Mm-hmm. The National Governors Association endorsed the bill it was the first bill they'd endorsed in 20 years of any kind because of the significance of it, and created a James Madison Award for Federalism because of it. So that's the main significance. And I think for those of you who are taking notes and going to have to implement it, I think the exciting thing is that it unleashes permission, or a better way to say it is it recognizes that the path to better teaching, higher standards, higher achievement lies through the classroom teacher, the local school board, and the state of Tennessee rather than through Washington. So it's an opportunity for innovation. We can do this instead of that. Let's try this instead of that. Let's do this. We don't have to go play Mother May I with somebody in Washington, D.C. Even before all this stuff came up, I can remember back when I was governor, I was all upset about the federal rules on education. And I called Bill Bennett, who was then the education secretary, and I was just complaining right and left. And he says, okay, there probably are too many. I'll make a deal with you. He said, why don't you go count up the state rules on the local school district, and we'll compare them to the federal rules, and I'll bet you have more state rules than federal rules. He had a pretty good point. So while you're at it, you might review what the State Department of Education and the State Board of Education are telling you to do, which is why I would start from scratch and say, if we were going to have ideal standards for Metro, Murray County, if we're going to have ideal tests, if we're going to use a test in this way or that way, if we're going to try to help help schools that need help, or teachers that need help, or students that need help, I'd start out that way. And then I'd go look for the obstacles in your way at the state level and the federal level. And I'll bet you can find out in the end, you can probably do 80 or 90% of what you'd like to do. But if you start out the other way saying, let's read the rules and see what we can do, that's not the way to do it.
I think we have now in the state of Tennessee a commissioner who will listen to the local voice, and we certainly need to take advantage of that at this point in time. It's very important. We do have some mics around, and I would like to open it up now. We've got about 5 minutes to see if there are questions. There's one right here.
I can talk loud. Time is an issue. Thank you. How would you suggest?
Please tell us who you are and what organization you represent.
My name's Greg Webb, and I'm a graduate student here in the Education Department. Any suggestions for creating incentives for states like Florida to not administer 83 tests to accomplish the 17?
To do what?
Well, you said that it's up to the states for what they do with the tests and how they interpret them and that sort of thing. But you have this incentive, in the case of Florida, as you pointed out, to create 83 tests to prepare for the 17. Did I understand you correctly?
Yes.
And so my question would be, would you have any suggestions to the schools and districts and states that are now left up to their own creativity or innovation to incentivize them to not fall into the trap of giving 83 tests for 17
It was actually 183.
183.
Yeah. And it was Fort Myers, Florida. That's a great question. You know what I would suggest, I mean, you could do that here in Tennessee. I'd do an inventory of tests. I think if I were the superintendent of the Metro District, easy for me to say, I wouldn't dare volunteer for that job. That's a tough job. Or any other superintendent job. That's a tough job. I think I'd make an inventory of the tests, see how many you've got, and then take a look and see, well, who's requiring these tests? Now, of course, there are all sorts of assessments. I mean, teachers give, pop quizzes are assessments, aren't they? I mean, teachers give assessments all the time. So it's how you use them that makes a difference. So I think the answer would be maybe the State Department could do a spot inventory of tests and point out to all the school districts, you don't have to do more than 17 as far as the federal government is concerned. And you don't have to, and what you do with the results of those tests is basically up to you. And then that's the way the Florida thing happened. It was Jeb Bush's foundation that did the survey. And they came up with 183 tests in Fort Myers. And just putting the spotlight on it caused the school board to meet and reduce the number of tests. In other words, directs the spotlight. Everybody was complaining at the president for requiring over-testing, and partly it was because of the restrictive nature of No Child Left Behind. But that excuse is gone now. If there's over-testing in any Tennessee school, it's Tennessee's responsibility.
Yes, good morning, Senator.
Yeah.
Dr. Chris Marzak, Director of Schools, Murray County.
I know.
So as we do the shift from Washington to Tennessee, what do you see as now the role of the U.S. Department of Education?
Well, it ought to help you, assist you, and not try to keep the role of the department, in my view, is to create an environment in which you can succeed with your own ideas. The federal dollars should be used to help low-income students. That's the whole purpose of federal support. What I tried to do, but it wasn't adopted, was just to say the state could decide, could take all the federal money, and the state could decide to just allow that money to follow the children from low-income families to the schools that the state and the local school district decides they should attend. In other words, you wouldn't have any federal rules about that. The money would just go, money would have to follow the kids from low-income families, but after that, it was up to you. So that's what I think their job should be, to create an environment in which you can succeed, and to say, we've changed from this to that, and that should be their responsibility. Then they might put the spotlight on good practices. Look at Murray County, they're doing a great job turning around schools. Look at the teacher evaluation system in Metro, they're doing terrific. I mean, that's the way I tried to do it when I was there. Since then, it's become sort of a national school board.
Thank you for your time, Senator. My name is Justin Lang. I'm a junior sociology student here at Belmont.
Great, good to see you.
I have two questions of interest. So, personally, I do like the idea of giving the states and people that are closest to children the opportunity to meet their needs instead of having a certain, I guess, a cookie cutter type of frame to address the needs of students from a distance. But I guess my first question is, when you give states so much free, how do you ensure that the states do actually do what they need to do for the students? And then also, I'm just interested in what that looks like, what this bill looks like, especially in terms of predominantly non-white districts, or especially thinking of a district like Metro. And so, what does this bill look like in terms of students of color and low-income students, in terms of getting them the resources that they need specifically?
That's a very thoughtful question, and it's one we had to grapple with a lot. And I hear that a lot. How do you trust the states and the school district to do the right thing? Well, you know, I used to be governor. Now I'm a senator. Nothing ever made me madder than somebody who flew to Washington and looked back at me and said, I don't trust you to do the right thing. My answer to them was, who the hell are you? I mean, why are you up there? What makes you so smart? Why do you care more about children than I do? That was my feeling about it. So now I understand the view, because historically, The federal government has been the friend of the civil rights movement. I understand that. And I lived through that through my whole life. But today, I think we have to recognize that people in Washington are just people who came from states, and they're not any more compassionate than people who are still in their home states. And then I think the second thing maybe would be that, and I think we've seen it in the last few years, I think the President and Secretary Duncan were very well intentioned in what they tried to do. And they really challenged some of their traditional allies, like the President challenged the teachers' unions, for example, and made them mad by insisting on various things. But I think what we've learned in the last few years is that while your goal may be noble, if your tactic backfires, you can't get towards your goal. So if the President's goal was everybody have higher standards, including minority students or low-income students, if that was his goal, if the tactic he used, forcing people to do it from Washington, creates a backlash that undermines the higher standards, that doesn't work. If his goal is teacher evaluation and the tactic he uses undermines support for teacher evaluation, that's not making progress. So I think we have to, it operates different ways. There's some colleges and universities are better than others. Some schools are better than others. Some teachers are better than others. How do you fix that? I think you have to fix it in the community. I think people have to buy in to the solutions. And unfortunately, I don't think you could write a rule in Washington or issue an edict that would really get at that result. But it's a very thoughtful question, and it was the basis of a lot of the discussion we had and the compromises we had to make.
Okay, time for one more.
With the growing importance and the growing
Let us know who you are, please.
I'm
Sorry.
Mason Foote. I'm an undergraduate student here in the Education and Entrepreneurship Department. And with the growing research on the importance of social and emotional learning, how can we ensure that schools really focus on those needs of students when it's sort of difficult to keep them accountable on a traditional test? You can't really test character skills, but how can we ensure that schools focus on those skills?
On emotional?
Social and emotional learning, yes, sir.
Well, that's why you have school boards and PTAs and communities and parents who are active in the commission and the school district and who go to the superintendent in Murray County and say, whatever your assessments are, I want to make sure they include the social and emotional needs of my child or my neighbor's child or those children. And then once you've persuaded the superintendent or the school board to do that, you have the freedom to implement those policies and carry them out. The problem if you're chairman of the Senate's Education Committee, you can't imagine the number of really good ideas about education that 22 different senators of all ideological persuasions can make about what ought to be done in the Aiken School in Nashville. They're all good ideas, but the only way to effectively deal with them, I think, is for those arguments to be made to people who are close to the children and who are empowered to get a result. And then if they don't listen to you, or if they don't get a result, you get somebody else to do the job. So I, of course, agree that social and emotional needs of children are enormously important, but I think you need to deal with it school by school, classroom by classroom, district by district. I think it'd be very hard to even pass a state rule that forced schools to do that. I think it needs a very personal touch.
Thanks to your leadership, we have the flexibility to do that now. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a great education leader with us this morning. He's changed the face of public education for the next decade or so. Please join me in thanking Senator Alexander for his leadership.